She agreed to live in a shack that 7 families had fled in panic, taking with her only the clothes on her back and a cow so old that not even the butchers wanted to buy it. When she discovered what was hidden beneath those creaking floorboards, she understood why no one had the courage to stay. Can you imagine being so rejected, so publicly humiliated, that accepting life in a cursed place seems like the best option? But this story happened in the countryside of Paraná in March 1923, in the village of São Jerônimo, on the banks of the Iguatu River. Before we start, let me ask you something. Write in the comments below where you are watching this story from. I love knowing that there are people from all over following these tales of old times. And if you like these stories of overcoming odds and mystery, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss any episodes. Now come with me, because this story will give you goosebumps and touch your heart at the same time. The sky was heavy with grey clouds that March morning when Beatriz Moreira was thrown out of the Santo Antonio farm with nothing but the worn-out dress she was wearing and a patched shawl. She was 28 years old, her hands calloused from hard work, and her brown eyes were red from crying. For 8 years she had served on that farm as a cook, washerwoman, and seamstress. She woke up before the sun rose and only stopped when the last pot was washed and put away. The master, Mr. Arnaldo Ferreira, had died just 15 days prior, a massive heart attack while fixing the fence in the south pasture. Beatriz still remembered the desperate scream of the foreman calling for help, the heavy body of the man being carried back to the big house, and Dona Eulalia throwing herself over her dead husband with screams that seemed to tear the sky apart. Beatriz had cried too. Mr. Arnaldo had always been a fair employer, paid on time, and never raised his voice at her. When Beatriz fell ill with a high fever 2 years ago, it was he who sent for the doctor in the city, paying out of his own pocket. He was a good man, hard-working, a man of his word, but Dona Eulalia did not see things that way. The widow was 52 years old, her greying hair pulled back in a tight bun, and a heart full of bitterness that grew like weeds after her husband died. She began to see betrayal where there was none, to imagine things that never happened. On the morning Beatriz was expelled, Dona Eulalia came down from the main house with swollen eyes, but a firm mouth. Beatriz was in the kitchen preparing coffee when she heard the heavy footsteps approaching. The mistress entered without knocking, pointed a finger trembling with rage at Beatriz, and shouted loud enough for all the employees to hear. "You took advantage of my husband's kindness," she accused with a cutting voice, "throwing yourself at him, sashaying around here, trying to steal what was mine." Beatriz felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but the mistress wouldn't let her. She continued screaming, inventing absurd stories, saying she had found a love note that Beatriz had supposedly written to Mr. Arnaldo. It was a lie. All lies. Beatriz had never looked at her employer inappropriately, never written any note, never done anything that could stain her honor. But no one believes the maid when the rich mistress is crying and screaming. The other employees lowered their eyes, embarrassed, some because they knew it was an injustice, others because they were afraid of being fired too if they defended Beatriz. The new foreman, who had arrived only 3 months ago, stood in the corner of the kitchen with his arms crossed, watching everything with an expression Beatriz couldn't decipher. "Get out of my house now," ordered Dona Eulalia, pointing to the door. "I don't want you here for another minute." Beatriz tried to speak, tried to explain, but the mistress called 2 farmhands and ordered them to remove her. They grabbed her by the arms, one on each side, and dragged her out. Beatriz shouted that she needed to at least get her things, her clothes, the money she had saved for years under the mattress in the little back room where she slept. Dona Eulalia laughed with contempt. "Money? What money? You have nothing here. Everything you used all these years was paid for by me and my husband. Now leave before I call the police delegate and accuse you of theft too." Beatriz was literally thrown onto the dirt road that led to the village. She fell to her knees, scraping her hands on the stony ground. When she stood up, the farm gate was already closed. She stood there for a long moment, trembling, trying to understand how her life had crumbled so quickly. 8 years of honest work, 8 years waking up at dawn, caring for that house as if it were her own. And now she was on the street, with nothing, her reputation destroyed by lies. The cold March wind blew, bringing the smell of rain. Beatriz pulled the shawl around her shoulders and began to walk toward the village. Her bare feet hurt with every step on the gravel road. She had left in such a hurry that morning that she hadn't even put on her boots. Now she didn't even have those anymore. San Geronimo was a small village, just a main street with shops on each side, a little white church at the top of the hill, and about 50 houses scattered around. Everyone knew everyone, and news, especially bad news, travelled faster than a galloping horse. When Beatriz arrived in the village in the middle of the afternoon, it was already drizzling. She went straight to the house of Donna Carmela, the midwife who also took in sewing work and had always been kind to her. She knocked on the door, with hope tightening her chest. Donna Carmela opened it, saw Beatriz soaked and shivering on the threshold, and her face closed up. "Beatriz, I already know what happened," the woman said before Beatriz even opened her mouth. "The news arrived here 2 hours ago. Donna Eulalia sent word with her nephew." Beatriz felt the tears return. "Donna Carmela, you know me. You know I would never do such a thing. It's all a lie." The midwife sighed, looked sideways as if afraid of being seen talking to Beatriz, and shook her head. "I believe you, girl. I really do. But I can't help you. Donna Eulalia is rich. She has influence. If I take you in here, she could ruin my work. No one will call me to deliver babies anymore. No one will bring me sewing. I have to think about my survival too." And she closed the door in Beatriz's face. It was like that at every door Beatriz knocked on that afternoon. Donna Marta, who sold bread, said she couldn't risk losing the farm's business. Mr. Joachim, from the general store, didn't even let Beatriz enter. Just shouted from inside that he didn't want any trouble. The school teacher, Donna Laura, who always praised the pies Beatriz brought to church festivals, turned her face away and pretended not to see her passing. Beatriz spent the night under the church awning, curled up in the corner, listening to the rain fall and feeling the cold penetrate to her bones. She couldn't stop crying. It wasn't just the injustice that hurt, it was the loneliness. The feeling that no one cared if she lived or died. When dawn broke, Beatriz had a fever. Her whole body ached, her throat scratched, her eyes burned. She dragged herself to the fountain in the square and drank cold water straight from the spout, trying to relieve her thirst. She was sitting there, wet, dirty, defeated, when Father Domingos appeared. The priest was about 60 years old, with completely white hair and very light blue eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances. He approached Beatriz, placed a hand on her shoulder, and said with a gentle voice that she could stay in the church hall until she recovered. Beatriz grabbed the priest's hand and wept with gratitude. For 3 days she stayed in a corner of the parish hall, lying on some burlap sacks, burning with fever. Father Domingos brought soup, water, and prayed with her. On the 4th day, the fever broke, and Beatriz managed to sit up. That was when the priest said he needed to have a serious talk with her. "Beatriz, I help you because it is my Christian duty," the priest explained patiently, "but you cannot stay here indefinitely. You need to find a place, a job, something." Beatriz swallowed hard and asked if he thought anyone in the village would hire her after everything Donna Eulalia had spread. The priest shook his head sadly. "People are afraid to go against the powerful," he acknowledged. "But perhaps there is a solution." That was when Father Domingos told her about the shack. "There is a place near the river," he explained, choosing his words carefully. "It's a small shack, abandoned for about 7 years. The owner died, and the family sold the land to Mr. Bento from the dry goods store. He tried to rent it out, but no one wants to live there. They say the place is haunted, that people who live there disappear. Nonsense, of course, but the people are very superstitious. Beatriz felt a shiver run down her spine. "And why do you think I should go there?" she asked with a weak voice. Father Domingo sighed. "Because Mr. Bento said he'd give the shack for free to anyone who wants to live there. And what's more, he has an old cow that no one wants to buy. He offered the cow too. At least you would have a roof and an animal. You could plant, sell milk if the cow still gives any." Beatriz remained silent for a long moment. A haunted shack. A cow nobody wanted. That was what was left of her life. But what else could she do? She had no money, no friends, no family. Her parents had died when she was a child, and she grew up jumping from house to house of distant relatives until she got the job at the farm at age 20. "I accept," said Beatriz, with a voice that tried to sound firm but came out trembling. Father Domingos looked relieved and worried at the same time. "I'll speak to Mr. Bento then. He can take you there tomorrow." The next morning, Mr. Bento appeared with an old cart pulled by a skinny horse. He was a short, chubby man with a thick moustache and small eyes that hid behind folds of skin. He looked Beatriz up and down with an expression that mixed pity and suspicion. "Are you sure you want to go there, miss?" he asked, as he helped Beatriz up onto the cart. "The priest says yes, but I need to hear it from you." Beatriz nodded. "I'm sure," Mr. Bento shrugged. "Then let's go. But don't come complaining to me later." The journey took almost 2 hours. They left the village via the main road, past the Santo Antonio farm, and Beatriz had to swallow her tears, seeing the big house where she had worked for so long in the distance. Then they took a secondary trail that bordered the Iguachu River. The woods became denser, the trail narrower. The sound of running water grew louder and louder. Mr. Bento told stories as the cart rattled along. The shack had belonged to a man named Sebastian Leiton, he explained. A widower, no children, lived there alone. One day, he simply vanished. They found the house empty, pots still on the fire, clothes hanging on the line. They never found the body. After that, 3 different families tried to live there. None stayed more than a month. They say there are strange noises at night, that the floor creaks on its own, that the cow gets restless, mooing endlessly. Beatriz felt fear tighten her throat, but said nothing. She preferred ghosts to living on the street. When they arrived, Beatriz saw that the shack was even worse than she imagined. It was a small construction of boards darkened by time, a thatch roof with several holes, a stone chimney that looked ready to collapse. It had a broken window, the door hanging by a single hinge. Around it, weeds grew waist-high. About 50 meters away, the Iguazu River flowed impetuously, making a constant noise that sounded like an endless whisper. "And there's the cow," said Mr. Bento, pointing to a makeshift corral in the back. The animal was there, a skinny beast with brown fur spotted with white, ribs showing, one eye milky from a cataract. "She's about 15 years old," explained Mr. Bento. "Doesn't give milk properly anymore. The meat is too tough even for jerky. But she's still alive, so maybe she's good for something." Beatriz got off the cart with wobbly legs. Mr. Bento threw a burlap sack on the ground with a few things. An old blanket, a dented pot, a handful of candles, a small package of flour. "The priest sent this," he grumbled. "And look, if you change your mind, just show up in the village. But don't expect me to come pick you up." And he left, leaving Beatriz alone in that place that silence seemed to swallow. She stood there for a long moment, looking around. The forest was dense, full of shadows, even though it was day. The sound of the river was constant, hypnotic. Birds sang loudly, but she couldn't see them. The wind shook the trees, making a sound that resembled a moan. Beatriz took a deep breath, picked up the burlap sack and walked to the door of the shack. The wood creaked loudly when she pushed it. The smell that came from inside was of mold, dampness, abandonment. She entered slowly, her eyes adjusting to the gloom. The interior was even sadder than the exterior. A single room with wide floorboards, a stone fireplace, a crude table with 2 broken chairs, a wooden cot without a mattress leaning against the wall. Spiderwebs hung from the ceiling. There were dry leaves accumulated in the corners, brought by the wind entering through the broken window. On the back wall, a closed small door that must lead to some kind of pantry or storage. Beatriz dropped the sack on the floor and began to cry. She cried loudly, not caring if anyone or anything was listening. She cried for everything she had lost, for all the injustice, for being alone at the end of the world. She cried until she had no more tears, until her throat hurt, until her whole body shook with fatigue. When she stopped, the sun was already setting. Beatriz wiped her face with the back of her hand and forced herself to act. She couldn't afford the luxury of completely falling apart. She needed to survive. First, she cleaned a corner of the shack where she could sleep, swept the leaves, removed the spiderwebs, spread the old blanket over the wooden cot. Then she lit a candle and began to explore the place better. In the pantry, she found some empty jars, a rusty hoe, mouldy ropes, nothing useful. When night fell completely, Beatriz felt the fear return. The shack became very dark, only the weak light of the candle flickering. The sounds of the forest seemed to increase. Crickets, frogs, the river in the background, and other noises she couldn't identify. She was preparing a thin soup with flour and river water when she heard the first strange noise, a low creak, as if someone were stepping slowly on the floorboards. But she was standing still, motionless. Beatriz looked down and saw that the sound came from a specific spot near the back wall. The floor there seemed to oscillate slightly, as if there were an empty space underneath. Her heart raced. She took the candle and approached slowly. She knelt on the floor and knocked lightly on the board. The sound was hollow. There was definitely something underneath. A cellar, a basement. She tried to lift the board, but it was nailed down tight. That was when she heard the moo. The cow. Beatriz had completely forgotten about the animal outside. The sound was low, continuous, almost calling. She took the candle and went out of the shack. The night was moonless, only infinite stars shining in a sky that seemed to weigh on her head. She walked to the makeshift corral. The cow was standing, staring fixedly toward the shack. More specifically, toward the side of the shack where the pantry was. The animal shook its head from side to side, ears pricked up, and continued mooing that low, persistent sound. Formosa. Beatriz whispered the name she had just invented for the cow. It's okay. It's just the noise of the woods. But the cow didn't calm down. She continued looking at that specific point, mooing, scraping her hoof on the ground as if she wanted to go there. Beatriz felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She went back inside the shack, locked the door with a crossbar, and curled up on the cot with the blanket pulled up to her chin. She couldn't sleep at all. At every noise, her body tensed up, eyes wide in the darkness. The floor creaked from time to time. The cow mooed outside. The wind made the whole house groan. When dawn finally broke, Beatriz was exhausted but determined. She needed to understand what was happening in that place. And above all, she needed to discover what was underneath that floor. Beatriz spent the first few days just surviving. She cleaned the shack as best she could, patched the holes in the roof with woven palm leaves, fixed the door with pieces of wood she found scattered around the land. She ate little, just thin flour porridge and some roots she recognized from when she was a child in the backcountry. Formosa the cow remained thin, but Beatriz discovered she still gave a little milk in the morning, enough for half a mug that helped stave off hunger. But what really occupied Beatrice's mind was that creaking floor and the cow's strange behavior. Every night, without fail, Formosa became restless after the sun went down, mooing quietly, always looking at the same spot at the back of the shack. And every night the floor creaked in that specific place, as if something or someone was moving beneath the boards. On the 5th morning after her arrival, Beatrice decided to investigate for real. She took the rusty hoe she had found in the pantry and started working on the floorboards. The wood was old, some parts eaten by termites. She stuck the tip of the hoe between two boards and pried. The wood groaned, cracked, and finally gave way with a dry snap. Beatriz pushed the broken pieces aside and looked down. There really was an empty space underneath. Her heart accelerated. She continued ripping up boards, one after another, until she opened a hole large enough to climb down. When the dust settled, she saw a crude wooden ladder descending into the darkness. A basement. The shack had a secret basement. Beatriz took a candle, lit it with trembling hands, and began to descend. The steps creaked under her bare feet. The air down there was damp and had a strange smell, mineral, like wet stone. When she reached the bottom, the weak light of the candle revealed a surprising space. It wasn't just a basement, it was a passage. The walls were of compacted earth mixed with stone, supported by thick wooden beams. The ceiling was low. Beatrice could barely stand without bowing her head. The passage went straight for about 10 meters and then curved to the right. Beatrice took a deep breath and moved forward. Her bare feet felt the cold, damp earth. The candle cast dancing shadows on the walls. She turned the corner and almost dropped the candle. Ahead was a natural chamber in the rock, and the walls of this chamber were glowing. Even with the weak candlelight, Beatrice could see pink and purple reflections flashing in the stone. She approached trembling and touched the wall. It was covered in crystals. Hundreds, maybe thousands of crystals growing from the rock like stone flowers. Beatriz had never seen anything like it in her life. The crystals varied in size, from small as a fingernail to large as a closed fist. Some were translucent and pinkish, others had a deep purple that seemed to swallow the light. They grew in groups, forming clusters, and when the candle moved, the shine danced as if the stones were alive. She stood there for a long time, simply staring. Her brain tried to process what she was seeing. Did this have value? Were these pretty stones worth anything or just colored rocks? Beatrice knew nothing about minerals or precious stones, but something inside her said this was important, that this was the reason for the whole ghost story. Carefully, she tried to loosen a small crystal from the wall. The stone was firm, stuck in the bedrock. Beatrice had to hit it with a smaller stone until finally the crystal came loose. She held it in the palm of her hand, brought it close to the candle. The stone was heavier than it looked, cold to the touch, and shone with an internal light that was almost magical. Beatrice climbed back up to the shack with the crystal clutched in her hand. It was already noon, and the sun came through the window, illuminating everything. She looked at the stone in the daylight, and the shine became even more intense. It was too beautiful to be worthless. She needed to show this to someone who understood. But who? If she told the people in the village, they would want to take the shack from her. Or worse, they would believe she had stolen the stone from somewhere. Beatrice kept the crystal in a cloth bundle and hid it under the mattress. She needed to think. That was when she heard the sound of a wagon approaching. Beatrice stepped out of the shack, alarmed. She wasn't expecting visitors. Had Mr. Bento returned? Or worse, had Donna Eulalia sent someone to cause more trouble? She stood in front of the shack, shielding her eyes from the sun with her hand, trying to identify who was arriving. The wagon that appeared on the trail was different. Larger, covered with canvas, pulled by 2 strong horses. When it stopped in front of the shack, a man climbed down from the driver's seat. He was tall, broad-shouldered, brown hair with grey strands at the temples, despite looking about 35 years old. He wore heavy canvas pants, a cotton shirt with sleeves rolled up showing muscular tanned forearms, and a faded leather hat. "Good afternoon," said the man, taking off his hat. His voice was deep, deliberate. "Sorry to show up like this without warning. I'm Rodrigo Mascareñas, a drover. I sell tools, fabrics, some trinkets. I usually pass by here every 2 months. I didn't know someone was living in the shack again." Beatriz was on the defensive. "I am living here, and I have no money to buy anything," she replied dryly. Rodrigo looked around, noted the precarious state of everything, and then looked at Beatriz with an expression that wasn't pity, but understanding. "I see that," he said calmly, "but I didn't come to collect anything. I just wanted to let you know I pass by here regularly. If you need anything, leave a message with Mr. Bento in the village, and I'll pick it up on the next trip." Beatrice relaxed a little. "Thank you," she murmured. "But like I said, I have no way to pay." Rodrigo shrugged. "Sometimes we can trade. Do you know how to cook? Sew?" Beatrice nodded. "I know both." The man smiled. It was the first genuine smile Beatrice had seen in weeks. "Then if I bring ingredients, will you cook? It's been a long time since I ate a decent homemade meal. I can pay with whatever you need from the wagon." It was a fair offer, more than fair. Beatrice agreed, and Rodrigo fetched some things from the wagon: beans, rice, lard, salt, some pieces of dried beef. Beatrice prepared a simple but tasty lunch. They ate sitting on the front steps of the shack, watching the river in the distance. Rodrigo wasn't a man of many words, but when he spoke it was always something substantial. He said he had been a drover for 12 years, that he had lost his wife to fever 4 years ago, and since then lived on the road because staying in one place made him crazy with sadness. Beatriz, in turn, told her story. The unjust expulsion, the false accusations, the loneliness of having no one who believed in her. Rodrigo listened to everything in silence, and when she finished, he just said that some people choose to be mean because it's easier than being fair. And that he believed her. "Before I leave this place, let me help you with that door," Rodrigo offered. "It's going to fall if you don't fix it right. And you need security here, living alone." Beatriz accepted, and together they worked on the door through the afternoon. Rodrigo was handy, knew what to do. While they worked, Beatriz caught herself observing his gestures, the concentration on his face, the care in doing a job well. "If you stayed here longer, I'd ask you to look at the corral too," Beatriz commented without thinking. "The cow is practically sleeping in the open." Rodrigo looked at the corral and agreed. "I'll be back in 3 weeks. If you're still here, I'll fix it. And if you make me another meal like that, we're even." When Rodrigo left, it was already getting dark. Beatrice watched the wagon disappear down the trail and realized she felt less alone. It had been good to talk, to have company, to feel that someone cared. And something about Rodrigo's calm manner, his steady voice, his direct gaze, made her heart beat a little differently. Hey, you who are following this story, don't forget to leave your like and share with someone who likes stories of overcoming odds. This helps the channel a lot. That night, Beatrice went back to the basement. She took 2 candles this time and explored the crystal chamber better. The walls were completely covered. She calculated there must be pounds and pounds of stones there. If they had value, it was a fortune. But how to know? In the following days, Beatrice began extracting the crystals. She used stones to hammer, loosening the smaller crystals first. It was hard, time-consuming work. Her hands became calloused and bruised, nails broke, fingers bled. But she didn't stop. With every crystal she loosened, she felt a mixture of hope and fear growing in her chest, hope that this could change her life, fear that someone would find out and take everything from her. It was in the 2nd week that the problem started. Beatriz had gone to the village to buy flour with the last coins Father Domingos had given her as alms. She was leaving Mr. Bento's store when she saw 2 men standing out front, looking at her. One was older, must have been about 50, thinning hair and a prominent belly. The other was younger, thin, with small eyes and a thin mouth. "The woman staying at Sebastião's shack?" asked the older one bluntly. Beatriz confirmed with a nod, feeling a knot in her stomach. "I'm Olavo Vasconcelos," said the man, "and this is my son, Eduardo. We are family of the late Sebastião Leitão, the former owner of the shack." Beatriz sensed the danger even before he continued speaking. "Pleasure," she said, trying to sound firm. "The shack was legally sold to Mr. Bento. I am living there with his authorization." Olavo gave a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I know that. But I came to give notice that we are interested in buying the land back. It's a family heirloom, understand? Sentimental value." "It's not me you have to talk to," replied Beatriz. "It's the legal owner. And if you'll excuse me, I need to go." She tried to pass, but Eduardo blocked the way. "It must be hard living there alone," said the young man with a mild but threatening voice. "Such an isolated place, so dangerous. Anything can happen to an unprotected woman." Beatriz felt her blood run cold. It was a clear threat. "Get out of the way," she ordered with a voice that trembled despite her effort to sound brave. Olavo made a gesture, and Eduardo stepped aside. "We'll speak again," said the older man. "Soon." Beatriz returned to the shack almost running, her heart racing. Now she understood everything. The family knew the secret. That was why they had spread the ghost stories. They wanted to keep people away while they planned to recover the property and exploit the crystals without anyone knowing. And now she was standing in their way. In the following days, Beatriz started noticing strange things. Footprints around the shack that weren't hers. Marks on the ground, as if someone had been there during the night. One morning, she found the corral gate open, and Formosa had gotten out. She needed an hour to find the cow grazing near the river. Another night she heard horses, but when she went out to look, there was no one. They were trying to scare her. They wanted her to abandon the shack. But Beatriz wasn't going to give up. She had lost everything else. She wouldn't lose this too. She began locking everything more carefully, sleeping with the hoe next to the cot, staying alert to any movement or different sound. And she continued extracting the crystals, working in the basement during the day when she was sure no one was watching. She had already filled 2 burlap sacks with crystals of varying sizes. She hid the sacks inside the basement passage, covered with dirt and leaves. If someone invaded the shack, they wouldn't find them easily. It was on an afternoon with a heavy sky threatening rain that Beatriz heard the sound of a wagon again. Her first thought was fear, thinking it was the Vasconcelos. But when she looked through the window, she saw Rodrigo's covered wagon. He had returned. Beatriz came out of the shack and for the first time in weeks felt genuine relief at seeing someone. Rodrigo stepped down from the wagon and took off his hat. "I came to fix the corral," he said simply. "And I brought more supplies for you to cook again, if you're still up for the trade." Beatriz agreed, but Rodrigo noticed something different about her. "Are you okay?" he asked, frowning. "You seem scared." Beatriz hesitated, but then decided to trust him. She told him about the Vasconcelos, the threats, the strange things happening around the shack. Rodrigo's face became serious. "I know the Vasconcelos family," he said with a hard voice. "They're bad people. Old Olavo has been involved in several land disputes around here, and the son is worse, a coward and characterless. You can't stay here alone without protection." "But I have nowhere to go," Beatriz confessed, feeling tears threaten. "And I won't let them drive me out again. I've already been driven out once, already lost everything. I won't hand this over on a platter." Rodrigo fell silent for a moment, clearly thinking. Then he said something that completely surprised Beatriz. "I can stay a few days. I have 3 weeks until my next route. I can camp near here, help you with the shack repairs, and at the same time keep the Vasconcelos away. If they see you're not alone, they'll think twice before trying anything." Beatriz felt a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. "I can't ask that," she protested. "You have your life, your work." Rodrigo put his hat back on his head and looked straight into her eyes. "You aren't asking. I'm offering. And to be honest, it's been a long time since I had a good reason to stay put somewhere. Maybe it'll be good for me too." And so Rodrigo stayed. He set up a simple camp next to the shack, just a canvas stretched between trees and a campfire. During the days he worked, fixed the corral, reinforced the shack walls, replaced rotten parts of the roof, helped Beatriz clear around the house. During the nights he stood guard, sitting near the fire, alert to any movement. Beatriz cooked for both of them, and they ate together at the end of the day. The conversations grew longer, deeper. Rodrigo spoke about the wife he had lost, Clara, how she was joyful and full of life until the fever took her in just 3 days. How he had been lost after that, not knowing what to do with the pain. Beatriz talked about her difficult childhood, being passed from family to family, always feeling like a burden. About how she'd found a place at the Santo Antonio farm, how she'd dedicated herself to work, thinking she had finally found her place in the world, and how it all crumbled in a matter of hours. There was a connection growing between them. Beatriz noticed it in small gestures. The way Rodrigo always made sure she ate first, how he fixed things with extra care because he knew it was important to her, how his eyes lingered a little longer when she passed. And she caught herself fixing her hair before going out to meet him, smiling more, feeling her heart race when she heard his voice. It wasn't a fairy tale romance. It was something more real, more solid, built on mutual respect, on two people hurt by life finding comfort and strength in each other's company. One night, Beatriz made a decision. She needed to trust someone, and Rodrigo had proven worthy of that trust. After dinner, she took him inside the shack and showed him the hole in the floor. "There's something I need to show you," she said with a serious voice. They went down into the basement together. Rodrigo had to stoop even lower than Beatriz because of his height. When they reached the crystal chamber, Beatriz lifted the lamp they had brought and illuminated the walls. The expression on Rodrigo's face was pure shock. "Good God," he murmured. "This is—" He approached the wall, touched the crystals with reverence. "These are precious stones, rose quartz and amethyst, if I'm not mistaken. And there's a lot, a whole lot." Beatriz felt the relief of finally being able to share the secret. "I wasn't sure," she confessed. "I've never seen anything like this. Do you think it's worth anything?" Rodrigo turned to her, and his expression was serious. "It's worth a fortune, Beatriz, a fortune. Now I understand why the Vasconcelos want this land back." "Do they know?" asked Beatriz, alarmed. Rodrigo nodded. "They must. Sebastio probably discovered the mine, and before dying must have told the family, or they found out later. Either way, that's why they spread the ghost stories, to keep people away while trying to recover the property. And now I'm here getting in the way of their plans," concluded Beatriz. Rodrigo held her shoulders, looking straight into her eyes. "Don't worry. The property was sold legally. You are living here with the owner's permission, and everything under this earth is now legally yours too. We just need to register this before they try anything." "We," he had said. "We." Beatriz felt her chest warm at the word. In the following days, they made a plan. Rodrigo would go to the larger city, 3 days' travel away, and look for a reliable buyer for the crystals. He would also officially register that Beatriz was living in the shack and exploring minerals, guaranteeing legal rights. Meanwhile, Beatriz would continue extracting the crystals and keeping them hidden. But before Rodrigo could leave, the Vasconcelos appeared. It was early morning. Beatriz was milking Formosa when she heard horses approaching. Not one horse, several. She stood up quickly, feeling fear tighten her throat. Rodrigo came out of his camp, already alert. 4 men on horseback stopped in front of the shack. Olavo and Eduardo Vasconcelos were there, plus 2 henchmen Beatriz didn't know. Big men with unfriendly faces wearing machetes at their waists. Olavo dismounted slowly, looking from Beatriz to Rodrigo with contempt. "I see you found protection," he said, with a voice loaded with sarcasm. "But that changes nothing. This land will return to our family, one way or another." Rodrigo took a step forward, placing himself between Beatriz and the men. "The land was sold legally," he said with a firm but controlled voice. "You have no rights over it." Olavo spat on the ground. "I don't care about paperwork. This shack was my uncle's. He discovered something valuable here and died before enjoying it. Now it's ours by blood right." So they really knew. They knew about the crystals. Eduardo got off his horse too, his hand resting on the handle of his machete. "You have 2 options, woman," he said, looking at Beatriz with scorn. "Leave here today, and we pay you 50,000 reis for the trouble. Or we remove you by force, and you get nothing but some broken bones." Beatriz felt rage boil. "I'm not leaving," she said, with a voice that trembled not from fear, but fury. "You don't scare me. I've already lost everything once. I have nothing left to lose." "Everyone has something to lose," retorted Olavo with a cruel smile. "Especially when that something can catch fire so easily. It would be a shame if this old shack turned to ashes one of these nights, with you inside." He had gone too far. Rodrigo advanced, but the 2 henchmen drew their machetes. The tension in the air became palpable, everyone ready to explode into violence any second. Father Domingos appeared on the trail at that exact moment, riding an old mule. His presence broke the explosive mood. "What is happening here?" asked the priest with an authoritative voice, despite his age. Olavo composed his expression, forcing a smile. "Father, good of you to show up. We were just talking to the young lady about land business." "Business doesn't require drawn machetes," observed the priest with a penetrating look. "And arson threats aren't business, they are crimes. I heard everything." Olavo's expression darkened. "You shouldn't meddle in this, Father. These are private matters." Father Domingos got off the mule and walked until he stood beside Beatriz and Rodrigo. "When it involves a woman under my spiritual protection being threatened, it becomes my business. And I'm sure the police delegate will also find it interesting to know about these threats." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Olavo made an abrupt gesture, and the henchmen put away their machetes. "This isn't over," he threatened, looking at Beatriz. "You'll regret not accepting my generous offer." And he mounted his horse, followed by the others. Before leaving, Eduardo turned and said one last thing that made Beatriz's blood freeze. "Mr. Rodrigo there can't stay forever, and when he leaves, you'll be alone again. Think about that." And they galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust and fear behind. After the Vasconcelos left, Father Domingos sat with Beatriz and Rodrigo and heard the whole story. About the crystals, about the threats, about the plan to register everything legally. The priest remained silent for a long moment, fingers interlaced on his lap, face marked by deep wrinkles that seemed to have deepened even further. "You are messing with dangerous people," he said finally. "The Vasconcelos have influence in the region. They know people in the notary's office, at the police station, even in the courts. If you don't do this right, you could lose everything, or worse." Rodrigo nodded. "That's why I need to go to Curitiba, Father. No one knows the Vasconcelos there. I can register the mineral exploration in Beatriz's name and find an honest buyer." "And how long will that take?" asked the priest. Rodrigo calculated. "Round trip, plus the time to resolve everything, about 2 weeks, maybe 3. The priest looked at Beatriz with concern. "And you will stay here alone all this time? After the threats they made?" Beatriz felt fear tighten her stomach, but raised her chin. I have no choice, Father. If I leave here now, they'll take everything, and I won't let that happen. Not again. Father Domingo sighed deeply and then said something that surprised them both. I will send my nephew Paulinho to stay here for a few days. He is 19, strong, knows how to use a shotgun. It won't be the same protection as Rodrigo, but at least you won't be completely alone. Beatriz felt her eyes fill with tears of gratitude. Thank you, Father. You can't imagine how much this means. The priest placed a hand on her shoulder. Yes, I do, daughter. I know exactly. And I also know you are a woman of fiber. You've been through too much to give up now. Rodrigo left 2 days later. Before going, he pulled Beatriz aside, away from the curious eyes of Paulinho, who had already arrived. Be very careful, he asked, holding her hands in his. Large, calloused, warm hands. Don't trust anyone but the priest and Paulinho. Lock everything at night. And if the Vasconcelos show up again, don't face them alone. Send Paulinho to get the priest or other people from the village. Beatriz nodded, feeling a tightness in her chest that wasn't just fear. It was also the pain of seeing Rodrigo leave. In a few weeks, that man had become too important to her. You're coming back, aren't you? She asked in a small voice. Rodrigo smiled, a rare but genuine smile that lit up his tired face. I'm coming back, he promised. You can bet I'm coming back. And when I return, we're going to settle this once and for all. He hesitated for a moment, then leaned in and kissed her forehead. A simple gesture, but one that carried so much meaning that Beatriz felt her heart race. Take care of yourself, Rodrigo whispered, and Formosa too. That cow saved you by showing where the mine was. She deserves all the good grass in the world. Beatriz laughed, despite the tears in her eyes. Will do. Watching Rodrigo's wagon disappear down the trail was one of the hardest things Beatriz had ever done. She stood there, hand still touching her forehead where his lips had been, feeling a mix of hope and fear for what would come next. Paulinho was a nice young man, round-faced, dark hair cut close, and hands that seemed too big for his still-growing body. He strung his hammock between 2 trees near the shack and took his job seriously. During the day, he helped Beatriz with repairs and extracting the crystals, which she had finally revealed to him on the priest's instructions. At night, he stood guard around the shack, the old but functional shotgun always within reach. The first few days were quiet. Beatriz and Paulinho established a routine. She cooked, he hunted, and fished. They worked together in the basement, extracting more crystals, and the pile of gemstones grew. Beatriz estimated they had already extracted over 20 kilos of high-quality crystals. But the peace didn't last. On the 5th night after Rodrigo's departure, Beatriz woke up with Formosa mooing loudly outside. It wasn't the low, persistent moo she made when she was restless. It was an alarm moo, high-pitched, desperate. Beatriz leaped from the cot, grabbed the lamp, and ran outside. Paulinho was already up, shotgun in hand, looking around with wide eyes. There's someone there, whispered the boy. The cow doesn't make that noise for nothing. They stood motionless, trying to see through the darkness. The night was moonless, only stars providing weak and insufficient light. The sound of the river in the background seemed louder, more threatening. Then Beatriz smelled it. Smoke. She looked back and saw with horror that the side of the shack was starting to catch fire. Someone had thrown something flammable there and lit it. The flames were still small, but growing fast, climbing the dry boards like a hungry snake. "Fire!" shouted Beatriz. "Paulinho, there's a fire at the shack!" The boy dropped the shotgun and both ran to the well about 20 meters from the shack. They began pulling water frantically, filling buckets, running back and throwing it on the flames, but it wasn't enough. The fire spread faster than they could extinguish it. Beatriz entered the shack quickly to save what she could. She grabbed the bag with her few clothes, the blanket, the pot. Her eyes fell on the hole in the floor that accessed the basement. The crystals, the bags of crystals were down there. There was no time. If she stayed trying to haul up the sacks, the fire would surround her. But if she lost the crystals, everything would have been in vain. Beatriz made the decision in a split second. She ran down to the basement, grabbed one of the heavy sacks, and started climbing the ladder. Smoke was already entering, burning her eyes and lungs. She managed to get the first sack up, threw it out of the shack through the broken window, descended again to get the second one. This time, when she was climbing up, one of the roof beams began to crack. Beatriz heard the snap, looked up, and saw the burning wood splitting. Paulinho ran in, grabbed Beatriz by the arm, and pulled her hard. They exited the shack seconds before the beam fell exactly where Beatriz had been. The crash was deafening. Half the roof collapsed, feeding the flames even more. Beatriz and Paulinho stood at a safe distance, covered in soot, coughing, watching the shack burn. There was nothing more they could do. The fire had won. Formosa continued mooing, now a sad sound, almost like a lament. Beatriz walked to the cow and hugged the animal's neck, tears leaving clean tracks on her soot-dirty face. "You tried to warn me," she whispered to the cow, "tried to wake me up in time." When the sun began to rise, all that remained of the shack was smoking rubble. The outer walls were still standing in some spots, but the roof had completely collapsed, the interior destroyed. Years of abandonment, and finally a few days of hope, all turned to ash. Paulinho was sitting on the ground, head in his hands. "I'm sorry, Beatriz," he said with a broken voice. "I should have seen who did this. I should have shot." Beatriz sat beside him. "It wasn't your fault. They waited for you to circle around the other side. They did it fast and vanished. There were several of them, I'm sure." Father Domingos arrived near noon, brought by Paulinho, who had gone to fetch him as soon as dawn broke. The old priest got off the mule, looked at the wreckage, and made the sign of the cross. "Thank God you are alive," he said with a trembling voice. "This could have been much worse." Beatriz sat on what remained of the front steps, with one of the crystal sacks beside her. She had managed to save 2 of the 4 sacks. Half the fortune had been left behind, probably buried under the rubble. "They tried to kill me, Father," she said with an emotionless voice. "If Formosa hadn't woken me up, I would be dead now." "Let's go to the police station," decided the priest. "This has crossed the line. Attempted murder is a serious crime. Not even the Vasconcelos' influence will save them from this." But when they arrived in the village and sought out the delegate, they discovered something that destroyed any hope of local justice. The delegate listened to Beatriz's story with a bored expression, didn't even write anything down. "And do you have proof it was the Vasconcelos?" he asked disinterestedly. Beatriz felt rage boil. "They threatened me less than a week ago. Said they would burn the shack with me inside. The priest heard it." Father Domingos confirmed. "I was there, delegate. I heard the threats clearly." The delegate shrugged. "Threat and execution are different things. Without proof of who set the fire, I can't do anything. And let's be honest, that old shack could have caught fire by itself. Rotten wood, dry weather." "It's been raining all week," retorted Beatriz indignantly. The delegate stood up, indicating the conversation was over. "Look, miss, you appeared out of nowhere, got involved with land that has a complicated history, and now you want to accuse a respectable family without any proof. My advice? Accept that it went wrong and move on with your life somewhere else." He was bought, or threatened, or simply too cowardly to face the Vasconcelos. Beatriz left the station with the priest and Paulinho, and for the first time since arriving at the shack, felt true defeat knocking at the door. "Maybe I really should give up," she murmured. "Everyone is against me." Father Domingos held her arm with surprising strength for a man of his age. "Don't say that. Rodrigo will return, and when he returns, you will have the legal documents. Then no one can touch you." "If I live until then," said Beatriz bitterly. "Guys, if you are enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. Stories like this deserve to be shared." The days that followed were the hardest. Beatriz slept in the church hall again, under Father Domingos's protection. Paulinho stood guard. The 2 sacks of crystals were hidden behind the altar, covered with mass cloths. Beatriz visited the shack every day, or what was left of it. She sat there in the rubble, looking at the ashes, trying to decide what to do. Formosa grazed nearby, never straying far from the owner she had learned to love. It was during one of these visits, a week after the fire, that Beatriz made a decision. She wasn't going to give up. She wasn't going to let the Vasconcelos win. She was going to rebuild, even if it was just a simple cover, a basic shelter. She was going back to that land and would continue extracting the crystals remaining in the basement. Because that was hers, legally, morally, and factually. And no one was taking that from her. With help from Paulinho and some men from the village, whom the priest convinced to assist, Beatriz began clearing the rubble. They found the basement entrance miraculously intact, protected by fallen beams that had formed a sort of tent over the opening. And even more miraculous, the 2 sacks of crystals left behind were there, dirty with ash, but whole. Beatriz wept with relief. She hadn't lost half the fortune. She had lost the house, but not the crystals. They worked for days erecting a new structure. It wasn't a pretty shack, just 4 walls of new boards bought with the little money the priest managed to lend, and a thatched roof. But it was shelter. It was a new beginning. That was when Rodrigo returned. Beatriz was hammering a board onto the wall when she heard the familiar sound of the wagon. Her heart raced. She dropped the hammer and ran to the trail. And there he was, getting down from the wagon with that deliberate and solid manner she had learned to love. Rodrigo looked around, saw the new structure where the old shack used to be, saw Beatriz's dirty and tired face, and understood immediately that something had happened. "What happened?" he asked, already walking toward her. Beatriz told him everything: the fire, the delegates' indifference, the reconstruction. Rodrigo's expression grew increasingly closed, jaw tight, eyes darkening with anger. "They tried to kill you," he said in a low voice charged with fury. Beatriz nodded. "But they didn't succeed, and I'm not giving up." Rodrigo pulled Beatriz into a tight hug, so strong it almost took her breath away. She felt his heart beating fast against her ear, felt his strong arms around her, and for the first time in days allowed herself to feel safe. "You really aren't giving up," agreed Rodrigo, still holding her, "because now we are going to end this once and for all." He had brought news. He had registered the mineral exploration in Beatriz's name at the registry in Curitiba. He had papers signed, stamped, completely legal. He also had a contract with an honest gemstone merchant who was willing to buy the entire crystal production for a fair price. And he had done one more thing. Rodrigo handed an envelope to Beatriz. She opened it and found a deed. The deed to the shack's land. "I bought it from Mr. Bento," explained Rodrigo. "I paid double what he asked so he wouldn't ask questions and would sign quickly. Now the land is registered in your name. You are officially the legal owner of this land and everything on it and under it." Beatriz looked at the document in disbelief. Rodrigo had used his money, probably everything he had saved in years of work as a drover, to buy that land for her. "How am I going to repay you?" she asked with a choked voice. Rodrigo smiled. "You don't need to repay me. When you sell the crystals, you'll have plenty of money. And if you want, we can be partners. I help you manage everything, sell the stones, rebuild this place properly." "Partners," repeated Beatriz. "Just partners?" Rodrigo looked deep into her eyes, and what Beatriz saw there made her heart practically leap out of her chest. "Depends," he said with a soft voice. "Do you want it to be more than that?" Beatriz didn't answer with words. She just leaned in and kissed Rodrigo. It was a slow kiss, full of promise, hope, everything they had been through together and everything they would yet go through. When they separated, both were smiling. "Then it's better than just partners," whispered Beatriz. "Much better." The next day, they went to the police station together. Rodrigo placed all the documents on the delegate's desk with a thud that made the man jump in fright. Registered deed, mineral exploration authorization, everything stamped in Curitiba, said Rodrigo with a firm voice. "Ms. Beatriz Moreira is the legal owner of this land, and we are going to formally register the complaint regarding arson and attempted murder." The delegate looked at the documents, color draining from his face. "But," he started. Rodrigo leaned over the table, hands flat on the wood. "No buts. Either you investigate this properly, or I take this case to Curitiba. And there they will want to know why a delegate ignored an attempted murder of a legal landowner. How do you think they'll see that?" The delegate swallowed hard. He was cornered. He mumbled that he would investigate, that he would talk to the Vasconcelos, that he would do his job. Rodrigo and Beatriz left the station knowing it probably wouldn't come to anything, but at least now there was an official record. A document saying they had reported it. The Vasconcelos appeared 2 days later. But this time the approach was different. They arrived alone, without henchmen, and Olavo wore an expression attempting to be friendly, but coming out sour. "I came to make a business proposal," he announced without getting off his horse. "We buy the mining rights. We pay well." "Everyone wins. Not for sale," replied Beatriz, arms crossed. Olavo insisted. 100 contos de rei. That's more money than a lonely woman like you will see in a lifetime." Beatriz took a step forward. "First, I'm not alone," she said, pointing to Rodrigo beside her. "Second, this mine is worth much more than 100 contos, and we both know it. Third, even if you offered 1,000 contos, I wouldn't sell. You tried to kill me. Do you think I'll do business with people like that?" Eduardo, who had been silent until then, spat on the ground angrily. "You'll regret this," he threatened. Rodrigo stepped forward, placing himself in front of Beatriz. "Any other threat, any other incident, and I personally go to Curitiba to report you for attempted homicide. And this time there won't be a local delegate to protect you. You'll answer in the capital." Father and son exchanged glances. They knew they had lost. The property was legally registered, exploration authorized, and now they had too many witnesses and too much documentation to continue with intimidation. Olavo pulled the horse's reins hard. "You'll see," he grumbled, "this region doesn't forget." And they galloped away. Beatriz turned to Rodrigo. "Do you think they'll come back?" Rodrigo shook his head. "Not the way they were coming. They know it would be too dangerous now. But let's stay alert anyway." The months that followed were hard but rewarding work. Beatriz and Rodrigo established a solid routine. They extracted crystals part of the day, sold to the merchant from Curitiba that Rodrigo had found, and used the money to improve the property. The simple structure turned into a real house with 2 bedrooms, a large kitchen, a living room with a well-built stone fireplace. They built a new barn, a proper corral for Formosa, who now lived like a queen, grazing on the best grass and receiving special feed. News of the crystal discoveries spread through the region. Some people from the village who had turned their backs on Beatriz when she was in trouble now tried to get close again. Beatriz was polite but distant. She didn't forget who had closed the door in her face when she was desperate. But there was one she forgave from the heart. Donna Carmela, the midwife, appeared at the ranch one day with eyes lowered in shame. "I know I have no right to ask forgiveness," she said with a trembling voice. "I was a coward. I chose my safety instead of doing what was right. But I wanted you to know I always believed in you, and I always regretted closing that door." Beatriz looked at the woman who had been one of the first to reject her. She could feel anger, could hold a grudge, but she chose to do differently. She extended her hand to Donna Carmela. "What's past is past," she said. "If you want to be a real friend now, I accept." The midwife cried, and the two women hugged. Father Domingos continued to be a pillar of support. He visited the ranch regularly, always bringing news from the village, always offering wise advice. It was he who suggested Beatriz and Rodrigo marry officially in the church. "You are already living as a couple," observed the priest with a smile. "Why not make this official before God and men?" Rodrigo looked at Beatriz with that rare smile she loved. "What do you think?" Beatriz felt her heart overflow with happiness. "I think so." The wedding was simple but beautiful, held in the little white church of San Geronimo. Beatriz wore a new dress she had sewn with fabric Rodrigo brought from Curitiba, white with delicate lace. Rodrigo was clumsy in good clothes, but his eyes shone with happiness. Paulinho was best man, Donna Carmela was maid of honor, and half the village showed up for the ceremony. When Father Domingos declared them married, Rodrigo kissed Beatriz in front of everyone, and she didn't care a bit about the whistles and applause. She was happy, completely, absolutely happy. After so much suffering, so much rejection, so much struggle, she had finally found her place in the world. The crystal mine continued producing for years. Rodrigo completely abandoned the life of a drover and became the business manager. He had a knack for numbers, negotiation, dealing with buyers. Beatriz took care of the extraction, always careful not to damage the crystals, always respectful of the earth that had given her everything. Formosa lived 5 more years, always treated as a family member. When the old cow finally died of old age, Beatriz cried as if she had lost a friend, after all she had. They buried the cow near the river with a simple wooden cross. "Here lies Formosa," Rodrigo wrote on the wood, "the cow who knew everything." The property that everyone feared, that they said was cursed, became one of the most prosperous in the region. Beatriz hired people to work on the extraction, always choosing those who needed an opportunity, who had been rejected by others. She didn't forget where she came from. The Vasconcelos tried once more to cause trouble, spreading rumors that the crystals were being extracted illegally. But Rodrigo's documents were irrefutable. The investigation sparked by the rumor only confirmed that everything was being done within the law. After that, the family gave up for good and ended up moving to another region. 3 years after the wedding, on a spring morning, Beatriz discovered she was pregnant. Rodrigo was silent for a long moment when she told him, eyes filling with tears. Then he hugged her so tight, Beatriz laughed and complained he would hurt the baby. "Will it be a boy or a girl?" asked Rodrigo with a choked voice. Beatriz shrugged. "I don't know. But whatever it is, it will grow up knowing it was never rejected, that it was always wanted, always loved." The baby was born the following winter, a girl with dark eyes and a strong cry. They named her Clara, in honor of Rodrigo's first wife. Beatriz insisted on it, saying Clara had been important in Rodrigo's life and deserved to be remembered. The girl grew up strong and curious, always exploring every corner of the property, always asking questions about the shiny stones her mother pulled from the earth. 2 years later came a boy, whom they named Domingos, in honor of the priest who had helped them so much. The old priest cried at the baptism ceremony, holding the baby with trembling hands, blessing the child with a voice broken by emotion. The house that began as 4 boards and a thatch roof turned into a solid construction of stone and hardwood. It had a wide veranda overlooking the impetuous Iguazu River, a garden Beatriz tended personally full of colorful flowers, an orchard with fruit trees. People passing on the road stopped to admire, commenting on how beautiful the property was, how well kept. No one remembered the ghost stories anymore. Or, if they remembered, they commented laughing about how people were silly to believe in nonsense. Now they called the place Crystal Farm, and it was a reference for prosperity and honest work in the region. 15 years after that terrible morning when Beatriz was expelled from the Santo Antonio farm, she was sitting on the house's veranda, watching the sunset paint the sky orange and purple. She was 43 now, grey strands starting to appear in her dark hair, wrinkles at the corners of her eyes from smiling so much. Rodrigo was sitting beside her, his large hand holding hers, the two in comfortable silence. Clara and Domingos played in the garden, childish laughter filling the air. Inside the house, dinner was prepared, fresh bread cooling on the table, the aroma of stew coming from the pot. Everything Beatriz had always wanted: home, family, peace. "Do you regret anything?" asked Rodrigo, breaking the silence. Beatriz thought for a long moment. "I regret trusting Donna Eulalia without questioning. I regret not keeping my money in a safer place, but I don't regret coming here, accepting the old cow and the feared ranch, because that was what brought me you, and our children, and this life." Rodrigo kissed her hand. "And do you know why no one wanted this place?" he asked with a smile. Beatriz shook her head. "Why?" "Because they were afraid of what they might find. Afraid of having to fight, afraid of having to change. But you weren't afraid, or you were and faced it anyway. That's why you deserved everything you found here." Beatriz looked around at the beautiful house, the healthy children, the beloved husband, the land that had given her everything. "I wouldn't deserve any of this if I had given up," she reflected. "If I had let rejection destroy me. If I had believed I was what they said I was." "And what did they say you were?" asked Rodrigo, already knowing the answer but wanting to hear it. "A woman without value, without honor, without a future," replied Beatriz. Rodrigo squeezed her hand. "And what are you, really?" Beatriz smiled, a smile full of peace and certainty. A woman who turned rejection into a fresh start, who accepted what no one wanted, and understood that sometimes what looks like a curse is actually the greatest blessing in disguise. Stars began to appear in the darkened sky. Inside, Clara called, saying she was hungry. Domingos ran inside, shouting he wanted dinner. Rodrigo and Beatriz stood up, still holding hands, and walked toward the house door. Before entering, Beatriz looked one last time at the horizon, where the last colors of the day were fading. That ranch 7 families abandoned, that cow no one wanted to buy, that mine hidden by lies and fear. Everything had turned into a home, into prosperity, into love. And all because a rejected woman had the courage to accept what everyone refused, and the strength to discover the treasure that was hidden. Sometimes life puts us in the most unlikely places, gives us the options no one else wants. And it is exactly there, in what seems worst, that we find our greatest purpose. Beatriz had learned this the hard way, but also the truest way. And when she finally fell asleep that night, embracing the husband she loved, listening to the quiet breathing of her children in the next room, Beatriz smiled, because she had understood, finally and completely, why no one wanted that ranch. Because it wasn't for just anyone. It was for her.